full screen mode, or is this the full screen mode already?
Let me just try. Now,
Yeah, it is better. Yeah, thanks.
uh, let me start by thanking Deborah and Gaurav and everybody involved who invited me to give this webinar. So I'm going to talk about a new topic that which we have started working over the last 3 to 4 years. This is not the only research that we carry out. Typically, in my lab, we are primarily interested in applying network approaches to different biological systems. But this is an area which is new in which we are working, and I'm quite excited about it. So I intend to basically give an overview of the kind of work we are doing. We have published one piece of work last year, and I also would like to give you a feel of the kind of questions and the follow-up, research that we are doing in our group subsequent this one publication. Uh, so to give you an overview, there are roughly about 100 trillion cells in a human body. And one of the challenges our body faces is to be able to communicate between different cells. And there are broadly two systems which are available to communicate between different cells. One is, of course, the nervous system, and second is the endocrine system. One can also view the human endocrine system as a system of chemical messengers or hormones enabling communication between different parts of the body. So one way to view the system is that it consists of glands. For example, in this slide, I have listed some glands which secrete, of course, hormones into the circulatory system and thereby basically control distant organs in the body. So if you see the pancreas, which all of you are familiar with, it secretes insulin, which lowers the blood sugar. It also secretes glucagon, another hormone, which can raise the blood sugar. So, through the concentration of hormones, the endocrine system plays an important role in maintaining the body homeostasis. So, we are interested in chemicals in the environment which interfere with the hormonal system of the body. And these chemicals are popularly called as endocrine disrupting chemicals. So, actually, there is a lack of a standard definition of EDCs. So, EDCs is the acronym for these chemicals. But the World Health Organization gives the following description of a EDC. An endocrine disruptor is an exogenous substance or mixture that alters the functions of the endocrine system and consequently causes adverse effects in an intact organism or its progeny or subpopulations. So basically, any chemical or mixture in the environment which can get into our body and alter the functions of the endocrine system would be dubbed as EDCs. I should warn you that in this research, I will talk not of mixtures but only single substances, single chemicals which can perturb the endocrine system. So these EDCs actually are omnipresent in our environment. They are present in air, soil, and water. Few of the EDCs are also from natural sources. For example, there are EDCs in the plant-based foods, while most EDCs are synthetic chemicals used in human-made products, for example, in pesticides and cosmetics. So how do these EDCs interfere with the endocrine system? So there are at least two ways. One, the chemicals can mimic the natural hormones and compete with them in binding to the hormonal receptors, as shown in this picture here. But they could also indirectly change hormonal levels by affecting the hormone metabolism. I should mention here that though we have not worked in the second topic, we are more or less long-term interested in understanding this indirect effects of these EDCs by perturbing the metabolism. So one of the things you should note is that if these EDCs interfere with different hormones that are secreted by different glands in our body, they can actually affect a lot of the homeostasis. And of course, it is easy to see that they can cause from developmental disorders to fertility problems. So one of the things it is heavily associated with is obesity, for example. The exposure of EDCs is now well documented to cause obesity in human beings. So before I move on, I'd like to emphasize the disease burden and impact of EDCs. So by one estimate, if you look at the disease burden, impact on healthcare, and loss of productivity due to EDC exposure, it is estimated to be roughly $340 billion in the United States and 163 billion euros in European Union, according to this Lancet study. Furthermore, there was a study which was commissioned by the European Parliament, which I highlight here, which is a authoritative study which finds a lot of gaps in the definition of these EDCs and also the risk assessment. And it is important to also highlight that based on this study and several regulations, the European Parliament and the European Union has basically passed a non-binding resolution last year to remove EDCs from several products that are used in the European Union. Specifically, they are interested in removing these toxic chemicals from especially the baby products. So there is a lot more, if I say so, awareness about these chemicals and the toxicity in the European Union and also United States, but maybe much less in our country. So here I would like to mention the kind of research that we are doing and why we are doing. So this research that I'm presenting will broadly fall in the category of or the area of computational toxicology. So as you know, toxicology is an interdisciplinary field which studies the adverse effects of chemical substances on living organisms, not just human beings. And traditionally, toxicologists have used animal testing to determine the adverse effects. However, there are ethical issues with animal testing, so there is a call for replacing animal testing with alternative methods, specifically in silico or computational methods. There is another reason for also developing computational methods to predict adverse effects of EDCs. There is at least 100,000 chemicals, if not many more, which are in commercial use, that is, which are used in different commercial products in United States. And the US EPA, that is the US Environmental Protection Agency, has at best tested less than 10,000 chemicals to date. So most of the chemicals that we are using in our day-to-day life, these are synthetic, they have hardly been tested for toxicity. In this regard, computational toxicology is an emerging area which aims to build mathematical models to predict the adverse effects of chemicals on living organisms. So, in this direction, one of our goals is to basically use network based models or approaches towards understanding EDCs and also develop models to predict the effects of EDCs. However, in order to build mathematical or computational models for EDCs, there is also a need to create a highly curated data set for these EDCs. Here, I would also like to emphasize that to build any model, you need to input some data. And if the data is not of high quality, and specifically if it is trash, the results are most likely also going to be trash. So, with this in mind, we decided to create a highly curated data set for our future work on EDCs. And there were three important features that we were interested in the data set that we were building. One, we wanted to have a data set on EDCs or chemicals which cause endocrine disruption with evidence in humans or rodents. So there are other resources prior to our work on EDCs, but they have compiled information based on fish studies or environmental monitoring studies or just based on computational predictions. And these resources typically don't delineate these diverse type of evidence that is collected for each chemical. And so we decided to have a resource exclusively focused on EDCs with experimental evidence in humans or rodents. Furthermore, previous work are basically lists of chemicals which could be EDCs, but they don't list the different types of effects or adverse effects they cause in the human body. Not all EDCs cause all types of effects. So we wanted to also document the experimental evidence on these adverse effects, or what we call as system level endocrine mediated perturbations, which are specific to humans for different EDCs. Thirdly, and which is most important for our work, we also wanted to compile the dosage levels of EDCs. That is, at what dosage range that a chemical will cause endocrine disruption. Of course, at very high dosages, which are not realistic, any chemical could be potentially a EDC. So, but we are looking at realistic dosage range which is you normally encounter where you may see endocrine disruption upon the chemical exposure. So, this is an important activity of our research, that we have collected the dosages at which you see these effects from published experiments in our resource. So with these short-term goals in mind, we designed a four-stage workflow to identify EDCs with supporting evidence in humans or rodents in published literature. So I'll just quickly walk you through about a couple of years of work to create this resource. So in the stage one, we basically collected potential articles which could have experimental evidence on EDCs. So we took uh, articles from three resources which were already there. One is an authoritative report published by the World Health Organization. It contained about 337 articles. There is something called as the TEDx, not to be confused with the TEDx talks. It's called the Endocrine Disruption Exchange resource, which had about 1,000 articles, and another resource which is EDC's data bank, which covered 456 articles. Then we did a PubMed query, sort of text mining, to see which other published articles in PubMed could have information on EDCs, and we found roughly 16,000 plus articles here. This corresponded in total about 17,000 plus articles, and we manually read the abstracts to see which are the articles which could have information on EDCs. So the students read all the 17,000 abstracts, and we found that roughly 14,000 plus abstracts could have information on EDCs. Subsequently, in the stage two, as we are only interested in chemicals with experimental evidence in humans and rodents, and that too specific to experiments which are in vivo or in vitro in humans or rodents, we went through each of the 14,000 articles and picked out articles which are specific to in vivo or in vitro studies in humans or rodents. And this basically brought the number of articles down to 3,300 articles, which tested at least one chemical in humans and rodents in vivo or in vitro experiments. So these two actually sound a lot, but actually were the easier steps. Subsequently, what we did is that we took this 3,300 articles and we checked which is the chemical tested in each study. Since these studies report chemicals in a synonymous fashion, um, the same chemical could have different names in two studies. So we had to sort of build a graph of chemicals to studies, and through a lot of work, we compiled uniquely 1,626 chemicals which were at least tested in one of the 3,300 studies which we had compiled. Again, stage three took a lot of time, but still was not the heavy work. The next was the heavy work that we did, which is the stage four. So we were inspired by this consensus statement published by some of the stalwarts in EDC research. This was a result of a meeting organized by the German Federal Risk Institute, BFR, in 2016. Subsequently, Solecki et al. Published a consensus statement on the identification of EDCs. And here, basically, they emphasized on two things. The identification of a chemical as an endocrine disruptor should rely on weight of evidence evaluations of both adversity and mode of action together. So, as I emphasized before, prior to our work, the resources on EDCs did not typically document the adverse effects upon chemical exposure. So, and we wanted to check in the experiments in literature if there were adverse effects specific to endocrine system or not. I won't go into the details, but each experiment in the 3,300 studies for different chemicals was evaluated by us, and we were only convinced of the evidence for 686 chemicals, which we dub as potential EDCs from 1796 studies. And this basically forms the final list of endocrine disruptors and the supporting evidence. Once we have the list of 686 potential EDCs, of course, we compile diverse information on them, starting from chemical structure. We classified them based on the source in the environment, classification, and several other features which could help a lot of computational work on these chemicals. When I present this work, people ask us if it could have been done without manual work. That is, could we train a computational program to pick out all this information? So here is an example of the kind of detailed curation that we do in the stage 4. So this is an easier paper published in PLOS One because it only deals with one chemical. But most papers or the published literature that we document typically have 2 or 3 or maybe even 20 to 30 chemicals. So if you see, we mark the chemical which was tested, the study type, because it was tested in mice, so it is rodent. It is an in vivo study. We check the concentrations at which this chemical was tested. We then document the adverse effects that are observed. So DNA damage and apoptosis in ovarian cells and affects follicogenesis. So this is recorded by the students. Subsequently, we sort of classify this as endocrine mediated perturbation of reproduction type. And then we look at the experiment to see the lowest dosage at which the adverse effects are observed, which is 20 microgram per kg. And finally, we create a graph like the chemical at which dosage to which perturbation. So I don't think this can be automated so easily. So once we have these 686 EDCs, so one can start doing some analysis on them. So one of the first analysis which we did was to classify them based on the environmental source. So it is not surprising to see that, so we classified them into 7 broad categories, from agriculture, farming, consumer products to pollutants, and then 49 subcategories. Of course, these chemicals are overlapping. So something which is used in agriculture can be also used in consumer products. But what is not surprising is that most of our EDCs actually are used in consumer products. We have also looked at the type of evidence we have. So only a very few EDCs in published literature have in vivo human evidence, but there are a lot with in vivo rodent and in vitro human experiments. That is, both in vivo rodent and in vitro human experiments support their classification as EDCs. So we have also classified based on the supporting evidence type the EDCs. We have also looked at the chemical classification of these EDCs. So we used a tool called Classifier, which basically gives a hierarchical classification of these chemicals into chemical kingdom, superclass, class, subclass, etc. What is surprising is that much of our EDCs fall into the category of benzenoids, and I will talk about this later, the implications of this. Finally, we have done one more thing. So as I mentioned, we documented the adverse effects for different EDCs. And actually, these adverse effects we collected was turned into a controlled vocabulary, if I say so, which can be used in future to report the adverse effects of other chemicals in toxicity studies. And thereafter, we classified these adverse effects into broadly 7 categories or 7 systems level perturbations. These are the major systems affected by the endocrine system, starting from the neurological to endocrine mediated cancers. So we have endpoints which are classified into systems. Why we did this is again inspired by the suggestion made in this consensus statement for identification of EDCs. So then we ask the following question. So in the reported literature, what is the type of endocrine mediated perturbation that you see a lot for EDCs? And what we find is that for many of the chemicals, actually for the major category we see, for which we have a lot of evidence, is that these chemicals typically cause a lot of perturbation in the reproductive system, a lot of infertility issues, if I say so. The second most predominant thing is metabolic. So as I said, ADCs are linked to obesity as well. So we have, of course, turned all this into a resource which is accessible, and you can see this. It's accessible via our server in IMSC. You can download the data, and you're welcome to analyze further. But the goal was not just to build a database, but actually use the resource for further analysis. So I would like to now go on and present some of the analysis that we have done. So the first question emerges is that the list of EDCs that we have are potentially toxic to human beings. We wanted to check if these EDCs are in use in any safe categories. So there is a list of chemicals which is listed by the US Environmental Protection Agency, roughly 800 chemicals, which are considered to be safe for use and are potentially not toxic to human beings based on US EPA. Surprisingly, we found that 10 of these chemicals are in our list of EDCs. Am I audible, Debrak? Hello.
Yeah, you are perfectly audible, Ajit. You can
Oh, okay.
carry on. Yeah.
So, um, subsequently, we also analyzed a second list, which is the list by Food and Drug Administration of inactive ingredients. That is, these are ingredients which are used in medicines, like colors that you see in your tablets. So there are about 3,000 such chemicals, and we found that 44 of these chemicals were EDCs. We did this analysis in September 2018, and what we have found is that subsequently, in 6 months down the line, some of these 44 chemicals have been actually removed by FDA. So that is very encouraging that the chemicals we have found as potentially toxic are no longer listed by FDA. Some of them are no longer listed by FDA to uh, to be safe for use in the along with medicines. Of course, if we look at so if you look at these chemicals, these 10 and 44 chemicals, where are they used? We of course have the classification of these chemicals into different environmental sources. What we find is that these are typically used in cosmetics like shampoos, soaps, hair dyes, household products like dishwashing liquid, food emulsifiers, food preservatives, and also pharmaceutical products like creams, laxatives, drug preservatives. I won't go into the detail, but we have also subsequently analyzed many other lists. One of the lists is about 1,328 chemicals banned for cosmetics in European Union. May not be banned in India, for example, but we found 101 of these 1,328 chemicals to be in our ADCs. So that is again encouraging that the things that we have picked up in our resource as potential ADCs are actually banned for various toxicity as well. So I want to go and present some simple network analysis that we have done with this resource. So we wanted to see how network perspective can give a view on these chemical spaces. So that is one area of interest in my group. So we decided to build a chemical similarity network of these EDCs. So we have 686 EDCs. So and we wanted to make a network where each node is a EDC and two EDCs are connected if they are similar in their chemical structure. So, for the computer scientists in the audience, you need a metric to define a distance between two chemicals or similarity between two chemicals. I won't go into the details. A metric, which is Tanimoto coefficient, widely used in cheminformatics, we use that. And this metric basically gives a similarity measure between 0 and 1. The more it is closer to 1, the more similar are the two chemicals. So, but using Tanimoto coefficient, you get a similarity between any two EDCs. So you can use that as an edge weight. And I won't go into the details, but we decided on a certain threshold to define the network. So we came up with an analysis and we did an analysis and came up with a value of 0.45 to decide if two EDCs are similar or not. So if the two EDCs have Tanimoto coefficient greater than or equal to 0.45, we will put an edge between them. And so that we call as the chemical similarity network. And when we view this network, we find the following picture. So this each dot here is a EDC, and two EDCs are connected if they are similar by more than 0.45. So what you see is that we have a large connected component of almost 255 EDCs, and there are many small components which are disconnected from the large component, and there are many isolated EDCs as well. That is, these EDCs do not share enough chemical similarity with other EDCs. Furthermore, when we submitted the paper, the referee was not happy. He wanted to us to do more analysis. So we went ahead and applied some modularity algorithms on this largest connected component and further subdivided the largest connected component into these clusters. What is surprising is that this largest connected component has 255 EDCs and that there is at least one benzene ring in each EDC. That is what we find. Furthermore, these clusters are such that they can be actually partitioned into chemicals with different numbers of benzene rings. So this cluster typically has chemicals with one benzene ring, while this cluster has chemicals with two benzene rings. There are a few outliers, of course. We also looked at further into detail. For example, we asked the question, the cluster 2 has chemicals typically with one benzene ring, and also cluster 11 here, which is disconnected from the largest connected component, also has chemicals with one benzene ring. Then the question emerges, why there isn't 2 and 11 clustered together? So a closer look at it shows that the cluster 2 typically has chlorobenzenes, while cluster 11 has bromobenzenes. So one can actually do these kinds of blind clustering and also figure out interesting chemical features about these EDCs. So this was the first network that I presented, which is a chemical similarity network. That is, the networks. It is a network of EDCs based on their chemical similarity. But the second question emerges: how are they similar based on the function or based on the gene or the protein target? So we wanted to build a EDC network based on shared genes or proteins they target. I won't go into the details, but the US EPA Toxcast has a has many assays to test these chemicals and basically look at the perturbed genes and proteins. But they have not tested all these chemicals, but we were lucky to find that 383 of the 686 EDCs in our resource were tested in at least one of their assays. And we took only the human assay endpoints relevant for our study. And from there, we can basically sort of predict the gene or the protein perturbed by the EDC. So once you have a bipartite graph like the EDC gene, you can then take a projection and build a EDC graph by using the Jaccard metric. That is, you ask how, if you link EDCs by an edge, which with an edge weight which quantifies the commonality of the target genes or proteins using the Jaccard metric. Again, this is a number between 0 and 1, and you can decide a threshold to sort of look at the network. And I won't again go into the details, but we decided on the threshold 0.517 to build this network. So again, this is a network not based on the similarity of chemicals, but similarity of the chemical structure, but similarity based on the similarity of their target genes. And when we view this network, it looks something like this. Again, you have a very large connected component, few smaller net components, and many isolated components. Here, the node size basically reflects its degree in the network. So the two hubs we have are, one is an octyl phenol, which is a well-known cancer carcinogen, and the other is DDT, a well-known pesticide and also a EDC. So okay, that's fine. That looks cute pictures, but the more interesting question is that, is there a correlation between similarity in chemical structure and similarity of the target genes of EDCs? So that is very important, because if there is a correlation, then one can use similarity in chemical structure with known EDCs to predict other EDCs. So unfortunately, when we do this analysis, of course, on the y-axis, we show the chemical similarity between two chemicals, and on the x-axis, we take the target similarity. And when we take the correlation between the two, we only find the correlation to be 0.17. So these observations, of course, underscore the challenge in developing models to predict adverse effects of EDCs based on chemical structure similarity. And also they challenge traditional QSAR or quantitative structure activity relation models, which try to predict EDCs based on similarity of chemical structure. And this somewhat calls for bringing in pathway-based metrics as well, to sort of build hybrid models which use both similarity of chemical structure and similarity of pathways which are perturbed to maybe predict EDCs. So I don't have time to get into here, but this has further implications of how to develop models for predicting EDCs. So since I criticize the QSAR based models, maybe I can maybe show some data to suggest that they are not always accurate. So to be specific, of the 686 EDCs that we have in our resource, 157 EDCs have experimental evidence to cause hepatic endocrine mediated perturbations. So there are several tools which are available to predict toxicity of chemicals and hepatotoxicity to be specific. ADMET-SAR is highly cited and widely used. So we tried to see what fraction of 157 EDCs with hepatic perturbations, known experimental evidence, were predicted correctly by these tools. And we found that the maximum is by ADMET-SAR, and that is only 38%. Similarly, we have evidence for 185 EDCs to cause endocrine-mediated cancer, and we tested ADMET-SAR and TOXTREE, which are widely used again to predict carcinogens, and we found that TOXTREE cannot predict even single of our 185 EDCs, while ADMET-SAR predicts 30%. So, with all the tools that we have evaluated, it is never the case that the prediction is more than 30% correct. So, this kind of suggests that we need to improve the current models to predict toxicity of chemicals. Before moving on, I just want to mention that we have analyzed two networks which can be created using our resource. One is the chemical similarity network, where the nodes are, of course, the EDCs or chemicals, and we connect two nodes if they are similar in the chemical structure. Second is the target similarity network, where we connect two EDCs if they are share common targets of proteins. However, there are other networks which are also existing in our resource, which requires more detailed uh, analysis and which we will be doing in future. So one is, of course, the bipartite network of EDCs and genes or EDCs and proteins, and one can look at a bipartite analysis as well in future. Actually, we also have another tripartite network, which is the EDCs, their endpoints, and the system level perturbation. One can also take projections of these and also analyze those networks. We have not done that, but we intend to do that in future. To summarize the first part of the study, which is published, so uh, we have identified EDCs with published
So,
experimental. Yes,
Arjit, can I just ask you a question? This is
yes,
Sriram.
yes, please.
Okay. If you go back to your earlier slide
Which,
about this chemical similarity networks,
yeah,
so this one, the summary slide, the last, yeah.
yeah.
So when you said that the chemical similarity network, the chemicals are similar, yet there is no correlation of the toxicity or something like that.
No, so we are correlating if similarity here is also a similarity here. So
Okay.
if two
So
chemicals similar, so let me just a second because I went fast there. Um, if two chemicals are similar in structure, can we assume that the chemicals will target the same proteins? And based on the limited
right
data that we
now, my
have, yes, please.
So my question basically is that, like, if you look into the chemical composition of your structure, it might be the same, but when you look into the orientation of the molecule in terms of stereochemical properties, it might be entirely different, right? Yeah. Or for example, one is optically active, rotate the plane of polarized light in one direction.
Yes,
The other compound might be rotating the plane of polarized light in the opposite direction.
yes.
So these two might be chemically similar, but it will be orienting, have a different optical activity and different, basically the efficacy, right? It is not just chemical similarity alone that matters, but also the stereochemical configurations might be playing a role, right? For example, if you have n chiral centers, then you might be having, in principle, 2 power n different structures, right?
I can't agree more with you. Um, so the thing is that, see, I'm not. I mean, Sriram, you know me for years. I'm not a toxicologist or not even a computational toxicologist, right? So the thing is that if we as computational biologists have to suggest the type of methods which will be highly predictive of a new chemical, okay? If I give you a chemical that is a structure, if I was to ask you to predict its adverse effect, what will be more successful? So what people have been doing, if I'm not wrong, in the cheminformatics arena is to use this QSAR models, which fundamentally rely on similarity of structure being the principle to sort of predict if they will have similarity of toxic effects. So what I'm saying with this analysis is that that doesn't seem to be true. That's all.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, that is
Okay.
the
Fair
only
enough.
message. Beyond that, don't take any further message. By the
Okay.
way, the only
Yeah.
thing the referee
Thanks.
wanted, let me just say one thing. The only thing the referees wanted, because we were trying to publish in a new area, environmental chemistry and all, the only thing they wanted is our paper is completely good. Just remove this part. Okay. So, but
Okay.
we thought to
But
get this picture into our study. Is that clear?
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Just go ahead.
Yeah.
Fair
So,
enough.
just to again re-emphasize, we don't see enough evidence of similarity of structure being similarity of targets, and there are many ways to explain, as Sriram has clearly pointed out. You can have two stereoisomers which are very similar in structure but have very different effects. Of course, yes, I completely agree with you. Okay, so basically, I would just quickly summarize this study. So what we did was we have done a lot of literature mining and manual curation to create a resource on EDCs. We have 686 potential EDCs and 1796 published research articles from where different supporting evidence specific to humans and rodents were taken. Once we have collected this evidence, we have classified, of course, the EDCs based on their supporting evidence from published literature, based on their environmental source, classified the chemicals based on their properties. We have also collected further information which could be useful for computational biologists, computational toxicologists, created a resource, and subsequently did two different types of analysis, comparison with different types of lists which could be considered safe, and also the network-centric analysis, which suggests a lack of correlation between chemical structure and target genes of EDCs. Once we published this work, there has been a lot of attention specifically abroad and also from regulatory agencies in how they can use our work for informing the risk assessment on EDCs on their end. And this calls on maybe exploratory area which we entered, and this is some unpublished work I want to present. Can academic research of the type that we have done on EDCs, can that help chemical regulation, which are done by regulatory science or agencies? Um, so of course there are a lot of other academic activities which have taken place in the space of EDCs, not just our resource which is Deduct, but there is of course the TEDx, WHO report, and EDCs data bank which I mentioned. And actually there are a lot of public resources on chemicals which are either used in different areas or consumer products, for example, or which are banned or considered unsafe. Can we use these resources to see if academic research can inform chemical regulation? And there are certain other questions we have in mind. So I will just quickly summarize this study, which we are going to soon communicate because I have only 9 more minutes. Uh, so we are basically again inspired by this EU Commission report, which is an authoritative report on different issues associated with the endocrine disruptors. So couple of things this report actually emphasizes is the lack of standardization in the definition of EDCs. Of course, we took a 4-stage workflow inspired by the consensus statement, but nobody there is a lack of agreement between what should be the definition of EDCs. What are the tests a chemical should pass to be called a EDC? Similarly, there is a lack of validated test criteria, and this is being highlighted a lot by the report that I mentioned here. Furthermore, this report kind of suggests looking for EDCs in these areas, like in plant protection products, from cosmetics to food additives, food contact material, drinking water, toys, etc. Similarly, there have been recently reports which suggest to bridge the gap between academic research on EDCs and regulatory aspects of EDCs. Because typically the academic researchers are not having a conversation with the regulators or regulatory agencies. And there has been suggestions, of course, that the current regulations are lagging behind the literature, that is the scientific literature published by academics on EDCs. So we basically thought that can we use public resources on these chemical inventories, regulation and guidelines and perform a comparative analysis of potential EDCs in 9 categories of chemical substances. These are the categories we considered, 9 of them, which are listed in the EU Commission report. So I will go quickly walk you through. So I just don't want to mention an update of the database, but we wanted to bring our corpus of literature up to date. So the students were brave enough to do another exercise, and we have not published this update, but it should be up soon. So we have now expanded to about 792 potential EDCs with supporting evidence from 2218 published literature studies as of January 13, 2020. And we wanted to first see, is there a significant growth of literature on EDCs? And we wanted to just take our corpus of literature to see if there is a lot more information in the recent times available for EDCs. So what we are finding is that based on the published literature, which is captured in our database, there are at least 25 new EDCs which have been added every year since the 2000s. Of course, the number of chemicals added per day is in hundreds. Still, there are a lot of chemicals which have evidence for endocrine disruption, which are being added to the scientific literature every year. So roughly, we have reached about 792, roughly 800 as per our database. Of course, this is limited to our data set. So what we did was that we wanted to see how are these chemicals being regulated, or are they in use in different categories, the 9 categories that I mentioned. And for this, we mined public resources to create or to gather different chemical lists and then classified them into 2 categories. One we called substances in use, and the second we called substances of concern. So substances in use basically are chemicals or inventories of chemicals which are used in certain product category. For example, in cosmetics. So we were able to find lists which list chemicals which are used in cosmetics. Or they could be guideline documents issued by government or an independent body for safer product formulation. That is, it could be a list of chemicals by some EU authority saying that this is safe to use, like the safer chemical ingredient list by the US EPA. Or similarly, substances of concern are either inventories of substances considered to be toxic, published either by a government agency or an independent body, or substances monitored, restricted, or banned for import, export, or manufacture by a regulatory authority due to their hazard potential. Let me say, it seems simple, but getting this list was a lot of work, and then getting them curated. So we were able to find about 36 lists, 17 in the substances in use category and substances of concern category, and this span quite a broad geographic distribution. That is, many of these lists are in EU, US, even in Australia, and some even in India. So I won't go into the details of this work, but these 36 lists can further be classified into these 9 categories that I mentioned. And what we did is that I will try to summarize quickly what we have done. We try to see if the EDCs that are captured in these academic resources, not just in our resource but other resources, are they seen in substances in use or in substances of concern. So roughly, if you take the union of chemicals in the lists which we categorize as substances in use, that are in use in some product that we come in our daily life, there are 24,622 chemicals, and roughly 600 of these are EDCs. Similarly, if you look at substances of concern, we had about 4,000 plus chemicals which are considered to be potentially toxic. But again, what we find is that there are roughly 600 chemicals which are EDCs in our list. And there is actually a large overlap of about 1,000 chemicals. This is not drawn to scale actually. And 350 are common between substances of use and substances of concern, which are EDCs. We further classify these chemicals into group 1, group 2, and group 3, which I won't go into the details. But finally, what we have done in this analysis I wanted to mention is that we wanted to see, okay, fine, there are some of these chemicals which are EDCs, which are in use, uh, which are in the category of substances in use, but are they produced in high volume or not? So there are lists of chemicals which are produced by various nations at very high volume. And we took two such lists, one by the United States High Production Volume Database and the other by the OECD High Production Volume List. And this gives a list of chemicals which are produced heavily. And then what we have seen is that at least 63 of these chemicals are potential EDCs. And we have looked at the distribution in various categories, for example, from food additives to food contact materials to biocides, etc. So I don't have time to go into this, but I believe that this study sort of suggests that the academic work on EDCs can actually inform the regulation. So, for example, we have found for many EDCs in drinking water, actually, which are documented now. So finally, I want to just quickly in 5 minutes present one further work, which is to take our resource on EDCs with adverse effects and trying to further link the EDCs to mechanistic impacts or mechanistic perturbations in the human body. And for that, actually, both the US National Toxicology Program and the OECD have a framework called the adverse outcome pathways, which they are promoting in a sense to sort of capture the mechanistic impacts of various toxins or toxic chemicals in the environment. This is not just specific to endocrine disruptors. So according to the US National Toxicology Program, an adverse outcome pathway, or AOP in short, is a model that identifies the sequence of molecular and cellular events required to produce a toxic effect when an organism is exposed to a substance. So typically these are sort of linear pathways with some complexities, which start from a molecular interaction or what they call as a molecular initiating event, mention an effect at the cellular level, then a tissue level, the organ level, then at the individual level, and also at the population level. And so the edges here are sort of called as key event relationships. I don't have time to get into here, but we are trying to use these adverse outcome pathways to develop some endocrine disruption specific adverse outcome pathways, because these are not specific to endocrine disruption. So we are trying to figure out or construct adverse outcome pathways specific to endocrine disruptors. So there are several resources on these AOPs, and the most widely used is by OECD, called as the Adverse Outcome Pathway Wiki. So it captures the evidence for AOPs in a structured manner, as I mentioned. So what we have tried to do is to take this information in the AOP wiki, and we are in the process of building a list of AOPs which are endocrine specific, that is, which capture the endocrine specific effects of EDCs. And for this, we have used information on exhaustively on the endocrine glands, endocrine hormones, endocrine receptors, endocrine disorders, the different endpoints in our resource to basically extract the endocrine specific key events and mammalian specific endocrine disruption key events from the AOP wiki. So to kind of give you a numbers, as of January 2020, there were about 258 AOPs in the AOP wiki, and this span about 1307 KEs, which are kind of, you can think of as nodes in the whole AOP space, and 1248 KERs, which are the edges. So these are very sparse networks. And we have gone through a high level of curation to figure out that 246 AOPs of this could be endocrine specific. And these many nodes and these many edges could be endocrine specific, and these are the mammalian specific ones. So, of course, there is a lot of crosstalk between these adverse outcome pathways because of shared key events. And this is an example of So this is one AOP and this is a second AOP, but they share certain events, key events here. So they are sort of connected to each other. What we find is that there are roughly 88 of the 250 plus AOPs, which could be very endocrine specific. And if you take a crosstalk between AOPs based on shared genes or shared events, these AOPs could be connected in this fashion. We are also trying to basically better understand the crosstalk between the AOPs by doing a graph theoretic analysis of these AOPs. So I am just quickly summarizing what we are doing. Finally, uh, this adverse outcome pathway picture is meant to be agnostic to a toxic chemical. That is, it is supposed to capture a chain of events starting from a molecular initiating event to adverse effect, irrespective of the chemical. But in recent times, there has been some attempts to link the chemicals or stressors with these adverse effects, adverse outcome pathways or the AOPs. So we are in the process of linking our EDCs to different adverse outcome pathways. So for example, there is a EDC called Congo rate, which we have linked here to two adverse outcome pathways. So this actually leads to impaired reproductive capacity and hepatocellular carcinomas and adenomas as mentioned here. So with that, I will try to end the talk. I would like to basically acknowledge the two people who led these projects. B.S. Karthikeyan is a talented postdoc in my lab, and Janani is my PhD student. So they have co-led the two projects on the regulatory, the deduct and the regulatory aspects that I mentioned. Janani is leading the project on the adverse outcome pathways and building an adverse outcome pathway resource for EDCs and subsequent work. Of course, they have received a lot of help from other people. Uh, Karthikeyan, who was a project assistant in my lab for a number of years, now I'm very happy he is doing a PhD at the Transinstitutional Program of Bioengineering in Dresden. Vivek is my other PhD student, and there are two master students, Aparna and Palak, who have contributed a lot to a couple of the projects. I have received some funding in the last few years, but we have no funding for this research, especially computational toxicology. But I acknowledge all the funders which have helped us sort of do this work. So what I'm finally happy to say is that although we just did this work for fun, we have received a lot of attention, especially press abroad, not in India much, who have taken this up. And I am happy to also note that regulatory agencies in the world are looking at this work and taking this seriously, and they're in contact with us and using our data. So I'm happy to uh, inform you that. With that, I will end my talk. Thank you all for the attention. I'm sorry if I went over time, and I will be happy to take any questions now. Thank you.
Ajit, I have a couple of questions. One thing is that your study talked about basically for the humans and rodents, right?
My computer is stuck. Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I can go.
I can hear you.
Yeah, so it's okay then. Go ahead.
Hi, Sriram.
Okay.
Thanks, Arijit, for your wonderful talk. Sriram, do you have a question? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so there are a couple of questions. The first question is that you initially started with your talk with looking into the two models. One is the human, other one is the rodent, right?
Yes.
But the human endocrine systems might be behaving in a different way than the rodents, right? For example, one of the things that which people have looked into it is the cognitive processes like depression, then under the stressful conditions. If you look into that,
Yes.
humans actually behave in a different way. Rodents behave in a different way. For example, if the very famous hormone dexamethasone, which is a suitable substituent for a cortisol, actually behaves in a different way for humans and different way for a rodent, right? So, do you think so that this work can be generalized to both rodent and human, or you have to take specifically rodent separately and human separately?
Very good question. So we have had a lot of debate, and actually, the two students, the postdoc and the students are really talented. So they have gone through various guideline documents. So I completely acknowledge your point. But the problem we had is that people are mixing docking to fish to zebrafish to uh, mice to rodent to humans to talk about everything. So we I would like to acknowledge that if we had limited to just in vivo human, we won't have found many studies. Okay, in vitro human has its limitations as well. So the ToxCast program, which I mentioned, is completely in vitro. Actually, most of the assays are in vitro. So, but there are several studies which report that. So this EDC exposure has also to be documented as in a different developmental stage. Okay. So, for example, if a child is exposed to EDCs, it can have different effects to maybe the exposure it as at the adult level, right? So, what we have read is that, uh, of course, the kind of questions that you have raised, as the issues are there, but there is quite a good correlation between sort of the exposure during the different developmental trajectory in rodents to maybe humans. So, maybe what I wanted to say is that we wanted to keep the fish type studies out, okay, and focus more on the mammalian aspects. But
Okay.
I agree with you that maybe not always we can extrapolate from rodents to humans.
So, one another question might be it's a far-fetched question. Is it nowadays this type of work is very important from the military point of view, where the where the soldiers who are deployed basically in a war zone, they do get depression, then post-traumatic stress disorders, where
Yes.
the endocrine deficiencies or something happens, right?
Yes.
The adrenal glands do not secrete enough cortisol,
Yes.
and there is an adrenal deficiency, or what is called as adrenal deficiency, right?
Yes.
So how does basically when you extend that to basically the humans in the normal life, what
Yes.
is the typical dosage of this particular one which will create them severe stress and adrenal deficiency and all those things? Is there any literature on that, or particularly about the endocrine deficiency in the cognitive process?
Yes. Of course, we have a category called. So, if you see the category NT, so several of our endpoints are neurological, right? So, one of the things, so
Right.
we have a wealth of data, but we have not analyzed it. So, one of the reasons these people have caught up attention to us is attention to our work is that we have collected these dosages for different endpoints from studies, right? So what you are saying is that we have data for it, but we have not made a thorough analysis of the dosages till now. There is a complication also. The dosage unit reported in different papers is never unique. Sometimes, it is normalized by the day of exposure. Let's say a rat has gone through, sometimes they
Right.
don't normalize. So actually what we did is that we had about 250 different units, which we once when we finished collecting, we could convert the units and uniformize it to only 19 different units, 19, but we cannot further simplify. uh, I can tell you that there are roughly about 300 chemicals in our resource for which at least dosage is available in one single unit. So we are planning to do an analysis of that type by taking the dosages for only those 300 chemicals. So a very valid
Okay.
question, but I'm trying to tell you the kind of mess the data is, which has not permitted us to immediately do the analysis.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah.
you can
Okay.
download
It
all those
was a
from our webpage, and you are free to analyze those. It's
Yeah,
available as
so
file.
yeah, it's a very interesting and nice work actually, and yeah, I'm through with the questions, right? Like Debarka, you can take.
Hi, Arjit, I have two small questions.
Sure.
So Number one is you mentioned that you in one of the initial slides that
Unfortunately, my computer is stuck, so I can't move my slides. I don't know what I mean.
that's fine. That's fine. But once you mentioned that you measured the similarity between the chemicals based on gene targets. Now I'm just trying to understand how did you define the gene targets, or is it totally from the literature?
No, no, no. I will try to explain to you. So we do have. So you have to understand that literature typically does an experiment of the following type. It exposes the rat or a in vitro cell line to a chemical and tries to see some effects, assays. Okay. So we have some indirect. From our literature evidence, we have some indirect, if I say so, targets or protein targets of the disease as well. Okay. So what the US Environmental Protection Agency does is that it has a program called the ToxCast. Okay, it is by far the most, uh, if I say so, the largest screening program of environmental chemicals. Okay, so they have roughly 1,300 assays, 1,300 assays to test different chemicals. To date, they have tested only 8,000 chemicals. Okay, and not all 8,000 has been tested for all the 1,300 assays. Of the 1,300 assays, typically for each assay, they have a reporter. The reporter could be androgen receptor going up, androgen receptor going down, for example. So my students went through all the 1,200 or 1,300 assays and figured out the assays which were specific for endocrine disruption and their protein/gene target, which they report. And for the 383 chemicals of ours which they had tested, we went through the assay and decided if the protein or the gene is a target of that chemical or not. We use that in vitro, that is in vitro assay, to that as an experimental sort of evidence for linking the chemical to the gene or the protein. Does that answer it? It's experimental data.
Yeah. Understood. Another quick question. I don't know if I missed one of the slides, but did you also try to predict de novo toxic chemicals?
In our list?
Yeah. I mean, for example, since you had a very rich data source, or you curated a very nice database, now did you try to predict some novel toxic substances?
So we have not done any machine learning type of studies, but I'm aware of our data set being used by several people to build now machine learning type models. But what I can tell you is that there are roughly 250 chemicals listed in our database, which were never listed as endocrine disruptor by for any previous work. I mean, any previous resource. So I mentioned 3 resources, right, which we started with also.
Right.
250 of our chemicals, 250 of our chemicals have, of course, experimental evidence in some published literature, but they were never reported in by World Health Organization or other resources as EDCs. But we have not done the kind of predictive modeling that you are kind of suggesting. So we are thinking about it. One of the reasons we have not done is that there is a huge EU contingent, which are our competitors. They have millions of dollars and they are actually heavily invested on it. So, but they have used, I'm aware of, they have used our data to build such models, if I may say so. But we are also thinking of doing that.
Got it.
So, but our focus is more in future to look at the metabolic impacts of these chemicals in that sense.
No, excellent. Okay, so I don't have any other question. Anybody else in the audience wants to ask a question?
Right. I want to just ask one question.
Sorry, go ahead.
Is a last question. The assays you are taken from different experiments. Did you take it from saliva, blood, or urine? So have you distinguished that? Because the concentration of these endocrine molecules will be different from it will be there in the body, but if you assay it via urine, assay it using the urine as the sample, or basically like blood, or basically the saliva, it gives you different results, right? So did you distinguish that? It's a last question.
No, it's a very good question. So you can ask also the route of exposure, for example, of these chemicals in the studies, right? we have data and we thought about all this, but I mean, it is somewhere lying there, but it has to be curated further. Shriram, did I answer you? I mean, if you think about it, these kids have read 2,200 papers completely.
Okay. Yeah. I agree.
And to be very specific, because I am very slow, so I made them annotate all the PDFs by highlighting each part from where they have taken the data. So we have this data, so we have the annotated PDFs, and we can pick data out of it, if I say so, of this type. So we are also concerned about this kind of questions for sure.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, Arijit, thanks a lot. A wonderful talk. Very different from what we typically see. It's a new domain that I got to know. Again, thank you for joining us. Yeah.
No, thank you all. Thank you all for the opportunity.
Look
Very nice
forward
interacting
to-
with all of you.
Look forward to have you here sometime after the COVID, lockdown is lifted.
All of you are also, please consider this as an open invitation to visit IMSC anytime.
Yeah, sure, I'll write to you. Yeah.
Thank you.
All
Thank you
right.
so much.